Hey everybody, it's Dan. Welcome back. This is going to be a review of the Elf Heavy Infantry box for the Oathmark range produced by North Star. And a huge thanks to North Star for sending this our way for a review. They sent me not only this box to take a look at with you, but they also sent several other boxes in their Elf range, which will allow me to not only review those sets, but to do some kit bashing between all of these sets so I can show off how well these sets all blend together. So if you're not familiar with Oathmark, it is a massed battles fantasy game produced by Osprey, and of course the miniatures are produced by North Star. And the design you can see from the box art is really rooted in like kind of 80s fantasy art, much kind of grittier, more in line with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy compared to say like Mantic, World of Warcraft, more high concept fantasy that we see from a lot of even like mobile games today, right? It's all much more, I'd say, high concept fantasy versus this much grittier, more realistic approach. So their box art is effective as ever, I think, in conveying that. 30 miniatures in all of these sets, and if you're not familiar with the range, I should also mention that every faction has, for infantry anyway, they usually approach it from like a light infantry, medium infantry, heavy infantry standpoint. So this is actually not fully completing the elf range. I did get word that they're also going to be putting out a light cavalry box somewhere down the road. But this is the most complete of their ranges with 4 boxes now between their infantry, light infantry, now heavy infantry, and their cavalry boxes. So the box art on the back usually depicts completed models, and it does in this case too, and a good idea of what you're going to get inside the box from a bits standpoint. So with that out of the way, as with all of my unboxings recently anyway, I've already taken the contents out, so we can take a look at those separately. So within each Oathmark box, and these contrast just so you're aware from their Frostgrave sets, which have round bases, it's more meant for like skirmish level play, and those usually have 20 miniatures in the box. These all come with 30 miniatures, true multi-part plastic, and they come with these Grenadier flats, 30 of them, and these are 25mm squares, if you care. So let's take a look at the contents here. As we usually get from Oathmark, it's 6 identical sprues of 5 miniatures, so we can isolate one of them to take a look at what's going to come inside of the box here. If you're not familiar with my reviews, the general flow here is that we're going to go through the sprue in detail. I'm going to give you a breakdown of all the bits, the components in it. We're going to put some of these figures together. I mentioned some kit bashing I'd like to do. I'm going to do some scale comparisons with other manufacturers in my collection, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. So let's do a quick overview shot of the front and the back of the sprue here. I mentioned that there's going to be 6 of these sprues for 30 miniatures, 5 miniatures apiece. And if you saw my Oathmark Heavy Orc Infantry review, you'll be familiar with their heavy infantry sets, and that the layout and design for this, I think, very closely matches that one. By which I mean you're going to have bodies in the center and heads on either side of the sprue here, some accessories, arms flanking the bodies, and the arm layout, even though of course it's elven design instead of orc design, is very similar from like a composition standpoint, in that you're going to have hand weapon and shield options, and you're going to have some two-handed or great weapon options if you're a Warhammer player. So let's start here with the bodies in the center. We'll take a look at the details here. And in contrast to those orc heavy infantry that we looked at, the design I think is really effective. I like that it's a much more uniform look versus like the orcs, which make perfect sense, even though they all have this little pouch sculpted on the one side, and that the armor is all consistent. The poses are slightly less animated than the orc heavy infantry, I think, but they all, I think, look very convincing and compelling. They all have this little kind of swirly motif on the front of the armor, which looks neat. And then effective design on the back as well, I think. They all have sculpted greaves too. Again, these are heavy infantry versus their light and their medium infantry, so they should have slightly more armor, I think. So that works well. Let's take a look at heads, because there are a total of 12 heads that I generally like to categorize. And in this case, I'm going to categorize them in 3 ways, which is that we've got 3 unarmored heads, 2 of which are on the top here, on the left-hand side. And there's 1 more unarmored down here. While I've got it flipped, we have 2 that are these enclosed face masks, which I think look really cool. There are two that are like kind of Corinthian style, by which I mean that the helmet kind of starts to wrap around over the cheeks here. So you got one down here, and you got one over here. And I mentioned there are 12, so the remaining 5 are all these kind of generic heavy helmet with some sculpted chainmail here. You can see going around the back. There are 3 up on the top here, and to flip one more time, there are 1 more here and here, which also have that sculpted chainmail. And so, yeah, I think that looks really, really fantastic. I mean, maybe my only critique is that I wish we had more of these more enclosed helms for heavy infantry. And we'll take a look at how, again, these like kitbash with the cavalry and whatnot. But maybe that would be the only thing I would want is, as ever, just more options. But that's always not always very fair of me. So let's take a look at arms now. And the arms, you'll notice, again, just like on the heavy orc infantry, those all had sculpted armored like pauldrons. And we have that here too, but in a more elven style. So you can see all of them have this little floral design sculpted onto the shoulder. So that looks pretty cool. And there are 2 categories of weapon here. I mentioned there's hand weapon and shield. Some shields up here. We'll get to accessories in a second. So there's 5 hand weapons, and then there are 5 great weapon or 2-handed options. Let's take a look at the regular hand weapons first. So you've got, again, 5 total hand weapons, 2 of which are swords, which have kind of this like leaf design. I think it's really cool as like a broadsword. And again, much more like manufactured, consistent look with the elves, and that all the swords are consistent. You have 2 axes, which are over here. These are all right hands, just to be totally clear. And as I mentioned, they all have armored like pauldron and some bracers up here as well, among the chainmail. So 2 axes, which is cool because you don't always see like elves with axes, but going back to like kind of the grittier fantasy aesthetic, I really like that. I think it's much more realistic looking. And then you've got 1, what I'll call a mace down here. There's also 1 left-handed sword option, which is not attached to an arm, but you can see there's plenty of left arms scattered around, some of which have hands already sculpted on like these here, which are clearly designed to go with the shield options. And then there are also, of course, some left arms that are meant to go with the 2-handed weapons. So you've got options in terms of how to use this if you wanted to make a 2-handed weapon guy. You do have a 6th sword option, or 6th hand weapon option, but for the left hand. You also have 5 great weapon options, which are also broken up in the same way. So you've got 2 great swords, which are cool because they really are just like large versions of the smaller sword. So I like that consistency in their design here. So 2 of these larger sword options. You've got 1 large mace option. And then you've got 2 large great axe options. As with that left-handed sword, you also have a call it a unit champion or something sword where it's resting on the ground. This is also a little neat detail that we've seen with all of their other kits so far, that they include some kind of like command weapon option. And that's, I think, what we've got down here. So great options in terms of weapons for heavy infantry, and I know we haven't reviewed them yet, but we will. I think that these are going to blend incredibly well with the weapon options from like the regular infantry, from the light infantry, and of course with the cavalry box as well. And then for accessories, we've got a number of options here. We've got, I mentioned those shields, which are cool. If I get in kind of closer, you can see there's actually like some metal strips around the outside of the shields, which I like. Even just from like a painting standpoint, it adds a little pop of color around the rim of the shields. You've got 5 of these daggers down here, and then 5 swords down here. And I got to say again, going back to like the sword design, I really, really like, even especially how these like in the scabbard, that they've got the design on the hilt of the sword here, the way that those kind of couple together, I think is very visually pleasing for me anyway. So 5 swords, 5 daggers, and then you've got actually 7 feather options. I mentioned 5 bodies per sprue, but 6 of the feathers are like single feathers like this. And there's 1 more like command looking feather here. And then rounding the sprue out, you've got 1 standard option here. And again, that might be my only criticism here. This is actually consistent with all of the Oathmark sets that I've dealt with, is that I find that the standards are a little bit short. It's not a huge issue if you've got other bits in your collection. In plenty of cases, I just took this top bit and then attached it to a longer spear. But anyway, the design's very cool. So I love this. I think this is really fantastic. Very evocative for me. It makes me think of like 5th edition Wood Elves in particular, so maybe that's the box art contributing to that as well. But as I mentioned, I want to put some of these together and I want to see how they scale up. So let's cut now and do that. All right, so I put some of these together, and what I've done here is basically built one of each weapon option, and then I took some of the weapon options from the base elf infantry and then put them on some of these bodies. So let's go down the line here. So I made 2 of them as greatsword wielding elves. And yeah, I think these just look awesome. Again, I think that the weapon proportions all looked really cool, all looked correct on the sprue, but certainly on the miniatures and stuff, like this is probably my favorite pose. I just think they look so imposing. Really fantastic if you're looking for like alternate greatsword models, or sword master models, I should say, for Warhammer, for those newly released high elves. And then I also made one with a great axe here, using a different head variant. And again, if you're looking for more static shots, I'll be doing some scale comparisons here in a second on the Lazy Susan. And here's one with the hand weapon and shield variant. I was surprised too. This is the beauty of multi-part plastic. You'll never convince me otherwise. Is just how many different poses, like how much movement you can get from figures just from like tilting the head in different directions. Like this is a totally different figure if you have them looking this way, right? So I love that about multi-part plastic, true multi-part plastic sets like this. And then I mentioned I took some of the weapon bits from the regular elf infantry, and that's what we've got here. So if you want to make like a heavy spearman, these are the arm and shield options from the base elf infantry set. And we'll do some other cross-kit comparisons when I review that set. I'll be taking some of the bits from this and putting it on those bodies just to show you that the conversions work in the opposite direction too. Also just to show you the slight, the kind of subtle difference in shield design between the 2 sets. Again, regular elf infantry on the left, heavy infantry on the right there. And then I also made kind of a heavy archer. So body, head, and feather from the heavy infantry. And then the arms and the quiver are from the base elf infantry box, which I think also looks pretty cool. So let's cut and let's take a look at some scale comparisons here. All right. So I have a bunch of different manufacturers here that I'm just gonna kind of slowly show you on the Lazy Susan here. The only ones I haven't really brought in are my miniatures for sci-fi or 40K ranges. But otherwise, you can see what I've done is, as I expand this scale comparison collection, I'm starting to write the manufacturers or the ranges on the front of the round bases there. But you can see that also they're all on the same base height at this point too, so any difference might come from just being like a puddle base that they're standing on. But otherwise, they're all fairly equal in terms of how high off the ground they are. So it should give you a pretty good idea of how some of these manufacturers scale up. So what's the final verdict? I think these are incredible. I think that this is, as we've seen really with every Oathmark box released, I really think that they keep getting better from a production standpoint, from a sculpting standpoint, from the like thoughtfulness of the different bits that they include within their sets. I think this is their strongest one to date. And I'll say, I guess I'll make a subjective claim and then I'm going to make an objective claim. Subjectively, I think that these are the best looking plastic elves on the market. And again, but that's in part because of my bias that trends toward this kind of earlier fantasy art aesthetic that they've gone with for their whole Oathmark range. So I think these are just absolutely stunning from a design standpoint. Now, let's talk about an objective claim though, which is that if you are not using these for games like Middle-earth strategy battle games, I would strongly recommend you give it a go. Because unless you're like trying to be a purist representing scenes from the movies, for example, and that's why you're using Games Workshop figures, these are so much cheaper and they give you so many more options in terms of how you assemble your forces. Like if you just look at the price per figure, for example, like this, if you were to buy this set, is from most of the distributors I saw about $33 US for 30 true multi-part plastic figures, right? Games Workshop's Galahad Dream, the like kind of high elf plastic box, is $52 US for 24 figures, and they're monopose figures, right? So if you wanted to pick up like multiple sets of those, you're gonna get the same number of figures, arm of the spear, arm of the bow, arm of the sword, whereas with this set, And again, we already saw some of the light entry to, say, kit bashing between the sets. It gives you so much more options if you want to build a bunch more archers or a bunch more heavy spearmen or great weapon armed guys, right? So that's $1 per figure, but $1.10 per figure for these versus like $2.20 a figure for the Galahadrim. How about if it's even crazier, if, for example, you want to use these for High Elves? Again, Games Workshop just re-released their High Elves, but it's all a bunch of old plastic sculpts going back to like when I started the game, right? But even if you're comparing like as close to apples as you can, and you wanted to make white lions, right? Even if you weren't trying to do any green stuff, work sculpt some cloaks on. I think that's probably what I'm going to do with mine. But they are, first of all, these already come with 25mm bases for the old world, so there you go. But even just look at the price. Again, this is $1.10 for this figure, right? A white lion from Games Workshop, their box, if you can find one, is $84 for 20 figures. And those are multi-part plastic, but that's $4.20 per figure. So exactly 4 times the price of one of these for, I think, inferior and subjectively designed. So anyway, give it a go. These are so reasonably priced that it's absolutely worth picking up just to see if it's something that interests you. Again, I've been putting out these videos, not to ramble at this point, but I'm putting out these videos on shopping guides for alternate fantasy armies. So even if you're not using these for Oathmark, I strongly encourage you to check these out, even just to see if it's something that you might like, because again, I think the price is right for that kind of a thing. So anyway, ran over, fantastic kit from North Star for their Oathmark range. And again, huge thanks to them for sending this our way. So I mentioned I've got a bunch more review content to come, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I appreciate you dropping by for this one. And until next time, happy gaming.